Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jody Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Red Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and certified informational privacy professional, providing practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hi, Justin Daniels here. I am passionate about helping companies solve complex cyber and privacy challenges during the life cycle of their business. I am the cyber quarterback helping companies design and implement cyber plans, as well as help them manage and recover from data breaches.
This episode is brought to you by, I get a symbol.
Yes.
Red Clover Advisors. We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, e-commerce, media, and professional services. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there's greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more, visit redcloveradvisors.com. Today is going to be super fun. We have two guests.
But shouldn't we comment that even though it's Thursday, it seems like our time in Montana was decades ago.
Yeah. We had a lovely vacation, what seems like 400 years ago, and it really was actually only 5 days. We need another vacation. Woohoo.
Yes, the first week of school makes for...
It does. To all the parents out there, stay sane. But we're going to dive into privacy today and talk to some really cool people. So we are talking to the co-founders of TerraTrue. So Chris Handman was the first general counsel at Snap before he co-founded TerraTrue. And at Snap, he built the company's legal, compliance, public policy, and law enforcement teams. And during his time there, he helped transform, or actually develop, a transformative privacy program that coupled rigorous review with tools and systems that were nimble enough not to restrain the relentless pace of execution. Chris is a Homeland Security Project Fellow at Harvard's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. And this is super fun fact. He's constructed not one, but two crossword puzzles that have been published in the New York Times, one of which was featured on the Clover Report. And he graduated from Yale Law School, my home state, actually. And now, who are you helping to introduce? Your turn.
So, Jod is a seasoned leader in software development, security, and privacy. He spent 9 years on Google's information security team and led security for social products. From there, he became Snap Inc.'s first chief security officer, creating programs for security, privacy engineering, and spam and abuse from the ground up. He and Chris partnered to launch TerraTrue. He holds a bachelor's degree in computer engineering from McGill University and a master's in computer science from, have you ever heard of Stanford?
I did.
But you know what? Before we start, I have to ask my co-host, you know that Colbert Report? Who's the guy who did the Colbert Report?
Go away. Go away.
Answer?
Go away. That's all I'm giving you.
Fine.
Are you done?
For the moment.
Are we ready to dive in?
I'm excited to talk to our guests.
Okay. So the two of you are going to have to decide who gets to go first and share the love. But we always like to understand, we did give some background to where you all started and how you got to TerraTrue, but we like to dive a little bit deeper. So Chris, I'm going to give you the softball. Can you start and help us understand how your career evolved from where it started to privacy and founding TerraTrue?
Sure. So unlike Jod, I took the less orthodox path into the tech world. I went to law school, as you mentioned. I was doing initially Supreme Court and appellate litigation in Washington, D.C. for years. And among the issues that kind of percolated to that level increasingly were around privacy issues, whether those were Fourth Amendment issues or emerging questions around kind of novel applications of old laws to new tech, and trying to suss out how companies and really how policymakers can think about the new ways in which these antiquated laws, which never anticipated new tech, read onto that. And I think that put me on the map when Snapchat, then still called Snapchat, in early 2014, was looking for a general counsel to build out their legal team. And I was employee 55 at Snap when I joined. And part of the reasons why they were looking for a GC so early in their tenure was because they did land themselves into a few outsized legal difficulties for a company of that size. And I think the most important one was they did get crosswise with the FTC over some privacy footfalls. And that landed them under a consent decree that lasted 20 years that was going to require the company, on pain of regular audits, to basically build what we now think of as a privacy by design program. Something that they were going to have to demonstrate that they could show they understood before any feature went out the door. They knew the data that was going to be used and how it was going to be used and where it was going to go, and on and on and on. A process that could be bureaucratic at the best of institutions, but it could be particularly strangling at a company that was accustomed to shipping software at the speed of light and being really innovative. So at that time, there was no privacy software. The only solutions were sort of large consultancies that had playbooks for 10,000 person companies and not suited for your agile modern company. And fortunately, Jod Boutros, my co-founder now at TerraTrue, had joined maybe a week or a month before I did at Snap to be the first CISO. And we joined forces to literally rewrite the playbook around how privacy can be done so that we can harmonize the need for that rigor that we were going to have to do so we didn't get put under existential fines, but also not restrain those kind of animal spirits that were driving Snap to do so many innovative things. And so together we did that and did something so well. The audits went off without a hitch, no deficiencies, but teams came to embrace it, product and development teams. And so we saw from there, after the Snap IPO, we both left shortly after, an opportunity to really build a platform that no one had done before and take advantage of our unique experiences there. And so I'll let Jod say more about what we ended up doing, but TerraTrue is really the natural consequence of those unique experiences we had at Snap, and how we understand that what was missing in the market was really that focus on a platform that can unify the way teams build and deploy and understand the risks before those products ever go out the door.
I love hearing people's stories. I say it every single podcast because I think it's so cool how everyone just kind of evolves and moves with the different opportunities. Jod, we'd love to hear a little bit about your story and how and what you were doing before you found your way to Snap.
Absolutely. First, it's great to be on your podcast. I'm super excited to talk about privacy and security. And also, as I just mentioned to you earlier, first time that Chris and I are on the same podcast. We're excited about that as well. I studied engineering, and I started my career developing first on very, very large mainframe systems for cellular telephony, cellular databases, and then sort of found my way into security when I worked at a startup that really was delivering services that were very security sensitive. So they stored all end users' passwords across all sorts of different sites just to be able to pull in the data for you and show it to you in one single place. And as a result of that sensitivity around storing passwords, social security numbers, and other information, they recognized that they needed to focus more and more on security. And I sort of got into that space, developing defenses against security problems and protecting better data. And from there, I was able to get to Google and join the security team there in about 2004, when the security team was still very, very small, under 10 engineers working on security. And as a result of that, I had the chance to co-found the InfoSec team at Google that was tasked with building defenses for security across all of Google's code base, but also conduct reviews at scale for security to help all the products launch safely without any problems. I got involved a lot with M&A work on security, vendor reviews, penetration testing, those sorts of things, which I guess I was lucky because I sort of joined before that field exploded as much as it currently does. And so I had the chance to take on a number of different roles. And from there, took on more leadership roles, became responsible for building security for all the new social products at Google and how they integrated with the rest of Google. And one day, sort of just in a similar story to Chris, Snapchat was in the news for a security issue, and they recognized that it was time to start building a strong security program. And I left Google to join Snap and literally start from scratch a security program across all the dimensions of security, but also privacy engineering and spam and abuse. Sort of built organizations for these over a number of years, grew it to over 100, worked very closely with Chris, as he said, on privacy. And then when it was time to leave, sort of after IPO, I started to think about sort of what's next for me. And I interviewed at a number of companies to do a similar CISO role. And I realized a lot of companies are still struggling with security and privacy. There is a lot of work to do just to get them to a level that feels comfortable, that feels right by users, by employees, by everyone. And I decided instead to tackle the problem in a different way and sort of start a company that helps make security and privacy easier to integrate into the way you develop and build software, so that a lot of other companies can leverage that thinking, that approach, get the tooling that they need, so that they don't feel that starting in those spaces is as hard as it's been for us at Snap and other places. And we've been very, very excited, sort of taking a novel approach to how to integrate privacy and security better into the way you build products, giving organizations much higher ROI, enabling the business to innovate at in a faster way, but also do that more safely with much better understanding of privacy and security. And we've been very, very excited continuing to work on that. So very happy to be in those fields.
Well, there's no shortage of companies who are still getting started. I see it every day. We have a long way to go.
So let's dive in. So, as a base level thought, what are the privacy challenges that you see companies facing today? Now we have a proliferation of we have 5 state laws now for data privacy in the U.S. plus our friends at GDPR. What are these challenges they have?
I'll start first and then add Chris's thoughts as well. The privacy field is growing significantly. It's still somewhat younger, certainly when you compare it to the security field, where there it had a chance over decades now to mature and become more integrated into the way organizations function and innovate and execute. There are a lot of challenges with, as you said, new laws, new requirements on enterprises. But really, to me, it boils down to a few core aspects. One of them is because this field has been growing so fast and so quickly, its privacy experts are in high demand. Whether those are privacy lawyers who are helping organizations understand their requirements by all these growing privacy laws and pushing towards complying and addressing those considerations into the way they develop, or privacy engineers who are building defenses in products, in the code base to mitigate a lot of the different risks. All these fields are in high demand, which really means that organizations tend to understaff those teams, and those teams are constantly overwhelmed. And it's not because they want it to be this way. It's just very difficult to hire. It's very, very expensive to do that. And as a result of that, organizations face difficult choices. Either they have to sort of lower the bar in a number of cases, or they have to slow down just to incorporate all the privacy reviews and privacy considerations into what they're building. And that context is very frustrating to organizations, feeling that they're not able to move at the speed that they want to do and do so reliably and confidently and safely. And it's a challenge that's going to persist. We've seen it in security as those fields have evolved, and now we're seeing it in privacy. And this is why we're also super excited about helping organizations tackle privacy better, more gracefully, more meaningfully, with fewer resources, more consistency, and more automation so that they can focus better on the risks that are important to them and still maintain that rate of innovation and rate of execution. The other aspect is, and we see this in smaller companies more than anywhere else, there is that will to do right by privacy, but they don't know how to get started. And it's overwhelming. That field has grown so much. The number of things you have to think about has grown so significantly that it's daunting to know where to even start. And we've seen that through previous employments where we were doing M&A audits, and we realized that organizations are struggling. What they say in terms of privacy doesn't necessarily match what they actually do. They're overwhelmed. They don't know what's the first thing they should do to raise the bar. And those are a lot of the inspirations that helped us think about how TerraTrue can provide a better value and achieve better internet safety and privacy for all organizations, and as a result of that, their end users. I'll also hand it over to Chris to see what he'd like to add to that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Jod nailed a lot of the core dimensions. I think what the gloss that I come at with that question is, you look at these laws, in addition to kind of just like the complexity that emerges anytime you have this kind of balkanized legal framework of different states coming down, is really, if you look at the substance, what that is driving companies to have to do practically. And that is a sudden reversal of the way companies have historically thought of data and privacy. Right up until just a few years ago, privacy was really just like draft as broad a privacy policy as you possibly can, get consumers to click an accept button, and then it's kind of like you're off to the races. And there was a bit of a open season on user data. And now what these laws are increasingly forcing companies to do is to think about prescriptive standards that they have to address with respect to specific types of data, sensitive types of data, sensitive uses of data, things that are forcing them to necessarily think about the footprint and the risk profile of the features before they ship those products out the door. And that, I think, is the fundamental mindset that these laws are seeing at a macro level. And that's I think where kind of we've been, again, I think in this happy position to take advantage of that, because as companies increasingly feel this drive to understand from their development teams and their product teams, okay, what are you planning to do with this data? Because we need to understand this, and you guys need to understand the rationale. We want to help you shape and make great user experiences in ways that are going to satisfy not just the letter of these laws, but also the broader spirit that we're starting to see in this kind of broader privacy zeitgeist right now. That is something that's a unique challenge for companies as they begin to develop their products. And that, I think, is one of the most important ways, and that we've been kind of a witness to it firsthand.
So as we've been talking about, and you alluded to, it's not just a legal issue. It's not one little department's job to go solve for privacy and read a law and figure out what to do. Can you share in more detail, how does TerraTrue help bring together all of these different teams to help understand what to do and make it more manageable?
Sure. I mean, I'll in the spirit of equity, I'll go ahead and kick this one off. And I know Jod will have, since he's the product genius. So the way we approach this is we think about privacy posing a number of different challenges for an organization. As you said, if you think of privacy as this kind of siloed compliance function that kind of sits off in the corner and is consulted at the whim of your teams, you're never going to really get privacy right. So our theory is that privacy has to be kind of woven into the fabric of that product development lifecycle, which means you need to develop a platform that can harmonize all the different constituencies in ways that feels like a natural extension of the way they work, not imposing on efficiency-minded engineers and product persons the sense that they're going to have to jump through 16 different hoops to kind of just satisfy the bow tie wearing compliance folks in the legal team. You have to have something that is a graceful extension. And I think this gets back to the experience we had at Snap, where, again, I personally probably would have been fired if I'd come up with a heavy-handed system that slowed down the way they had to develop. We had to come up by necessity with something that was going to work for them. And so what TerraTrue does is starts with that premise of let's have a platform that can gracefully pull in to TerraTrue as a single source of truth the work that your teams are already doing. So often teams are working inside of Jira, for example. We have a very robust integration that can, with different sorts of rules, identify the types of initiatives in Jira that warrant a review in privacy or warrant a review in security, and then trigger all sorts of different smart workflows that will be tailored to whatever you are happy to build. And so without interrupting the way those teams are building, just continue to file their Jira tickets, we can make sure that the work that needs to be occurring downstream is being done. And then those teams can work, the privacy teams, security teams, others can work inside of TerraTrue, do their analysis, have a two-way sync back with those teams. And so what we're really trying to do is create a hub where the work of product development and product review can all take place in one seamless ecosystem, and ensure that that work is as natural an extension of the way product built. That privacy should be a part of the product design at the heart of it, and that is what we're really trying to do.
I think Jod was going to add something.
Oh, because I have a follow-up question
go ahead.
specifically for you, Jod. As the
Perfect. I mean, Chris said it perfectly. I'll just add in my 2 cents and then listen, get your question. Ultimately, one of the key tenets of a strong privacy program is privacy by design. This notion that privacy experts are reviewing what features and products you're developing and helping the organization understand the risks and defend against those risks. And if you think of privacy as a pure compliance function, you're not able to be connected with what developers and product teams are doing. You're not able to review things before they launch. And with TerraTrue, we fundamentally believe that privacy should be part of the culture of the organization, should be collaborative, should involve different stakeholders and approaches and thoughts and dialogue, so that the organization can come up with the most intelligent way to mitigate risks before they launch new features. And so when you want to start being involved in conducting these reviews, first step is, what is the overhead? What is the friction involved? Because no matter how well-intended different teams are, there is always friction in starting this program and maintaining it. How do you communicate what you're working on? How do you wait for a privacy expert to give you feedback? How do you get them to understand what you've already reviewed previously, what is new and unique about the features you're doing, so that work isn't duplicated? All of that adds a lot of overhead to an organization. And our goal is to go for win-win situations where developers and product teams get more quick feedback about what they're designing, so they don't waste time developing a solution that doesn't reach the goals that are intended for privacy or security, and a win for those privacy experts so that they can focus on what is important, the real threats, the new considerations, and quickly ignore everything that was reviewed and approved previously. And all of that requires agility, requires tools that scale to be able to conduct these reviews at high volume. For instance, at our previous job, 1 year we had 5,000 privacy reviews. That's not 1 or 2 or 3. When you're dealing with that scale, you want systems that help you get the information disseminated more quickly, reviewed, understand recommendations, get the best outcomes and best decisions done very, very quickly. And that's what we've been super excited to build at TerraTrue. With that, Justin, what was your follow-up?
So my question specifically for you is, when we talk about TerraTrue, we've talked a lot about privacy, but it's broader than that. It's both privacy and security. And for the benefit of our audience, I would like if you could share specifically kind of your thought process when you're creating a product, because when you talk to business people who ultimately make decisions about privacy and security, they still struggle to understand that while they are very much related, they are different. But yet you are creating a product that helps companies really build and design software, bringing both of these concepts into the design, not as an afterthought. And just love to get your thoughts about this is what I want to do, but how do I create a software that's or a product that is user friendly that can handle both of these things when I'm kind of doing this for an audience who doesn't always understand the contours of privacy and security?
Great question. Thank you for that. In fact, one of the things we love about what we've built at TerraTrue is that we hear the same story over and over again, and we've experienced it ourselves. Developers and product teams want to ship some new feature or new product. They have to go to the security team and say, can you please review this for security concerns? And then they have to separately go to the privacy team and ask them to review for privacy concerns. And what typically happens within organizations is that the way they approach those teams are different. They're using different tools to relay to the security team what they're working on and to collaborate with the security team. And then they're using a completely separate process to connect with the privacy team and get the feedback. And where often we see this, first, it adds a lot of overhead. But more interestingly, often enough, you receive contradictory feedback from the security team and the privacy team, leaving you in a bit of a disarray. Which direction should I go? How do I satisfy the needs of both security and privacy? And it's not because those security and privacy teams are doing wrong. It's because they're focused on their area and they give recommendations that target specifically that area, and forcing the developers to take a step back and try to see how we can come up with solutions that addresses all of these needs. With TerraTrue, we make that a lot simpler and a lot more powerful because it's one tool that you use to connect with the security team and the privacy team, to collaborate with them on common threads and come up with solutions that are unified and consistent, and just really remove a lot of the friction and hassle of trying to figure out how to combine different solutions. The way I sort of look at privacy and security, you're absolutely right. They're often two sides of the same coin. You can't have privacy without security. Security is about how to best protect the way an organization builds its infrastructures, its servers, its applications, make sure that those can be hacked into, data exfiltrated, and sort of accessed in ways that are unauthorized. And that's a very, very simplified view. But for privacy, it's more about how do you meet users' expectations? How do you adhere to the different requirements that are there by the law? How do you protect the confidentiality of your data and make sure that when you're using user data, you're using it in manners that are consistent with the ways you've advertised and communicated? And so if you don't have security, there's no way you can have privacy, because any organization will be subject to someone accessing their systems, their data in unauthorized manners, and then they can do anything they want with user data at that point. So you need to have a strong foundation for security to ensure also the privacy of user data. And but at the same time, the approaches are very, very different. The work that is entailed for both is different. Sort of in security, it's much more often the case that it's black or white, right? You build systems that are secure against certain threats or they're not. With privacy, there are a lot more nuances because it also comes into what are user expectations. And user expectations vary a lot. They vary over time. They vary by that user's background and context and thoughts about how they're using systems. And as a result of that, sort of privacy is also extremely multidisciplinary, and is thinking through those issues in a much more sort of broad lens in a way. And then to make things more interesting, there is abuse, and sort of fraud and abuse tend to be somewhere also between security and privacy, because if your systems can be abused in certain ways, then you also lose that security and that privacy. And very often it's trying to think about how to reconcile all those different needs together.
In this conversation, and Chris, you mentioned it in our little pre-show, we hear a lot today about shifting left in the privacy space, and not everyone knows what that means. Can you explain, what does shift left mean in the privacy world?
Sure. So if you think about, so the shift left is a metaphor that draws its inspiration from thinking about a continuum of a life cycle and a product. So on the far left of that continuum, you can imagine is the germ of good ideas when they first start to take root. And as you go right, excuse me, the products start to develop, people start to spec out their details, start to code, and eventually on the far right, you deploy those products. And traditionally, privacy has occupied this almost off the charts rightward tilt. It's been a siloed function, consulted rarely, if at all, before these features go out the door. And it's an inherently reactive position, of course. And getting back to a question that Justin asked, as I said, I think these laws are forcing companies, as a matter of both the substantive letter, but also the spirit, to shift left, to get privacy further entrenched into that development period, so that as developers, as product people start to contemplate the boundaries of what they want to do with a new feature, that the concepts around, okay, this is data that is going to pose a particular sensitivity, this is a use of data that is going to be unanticipated by our users, or the combination of any of these factors is going to pose greater challenges than we need to, or do we even need all this data you want to collect? Can we accomplish the goals of this feature with 50% of the data you've thrown in here? And even just beginning to have those conversations around thinking about the data is itself a win in the way you think about product. And so the shift left movement when it comes to privacy is really taking what security had did decades earlier, which was to kind of move the security testing into that fabric of lifecycle. And now privacy is a little late to that game, but this is where we see companies increasingly trying to mature into, and where the biggest challenge they face, though, is again a lack of tooling. It's one thing to say you want to shift left. It's one thing to say, hey, as a matter of first principles, privacy, yes, should be a part of that. The challenge is the pragmatic. How do you do that? How do you do that in a way where, as Jod mentioned earlier, privacy folks in an organization often are outnumbered 500 to 1, 1,000 to 1 when you think about the engineers and product folks. That's a difficult question of scale. And so technology necessarily has to bridge that gap. And then you have to think about ways to mediate between these different teams, which again work in different tools and work in different disciplines at different paces. And so finding technology that can bridge those gaps, automate the feedback, scale and amplify the voices of privacy and security folks who are going to be outnumbered. This is where TerraTrue tries to make the promise of shift left, or what has often been thought of as privacy by design, into something that's a pragmatic, actual reality, and not the kind of just gauzy ambitions of academics.
If I can have the TerraTrue t-shirt that says shift left,
yeah,
I would wear that. And if it's dry fit, I'll wear it on my mountain bike.
Our head of marketing is a big bike guy as well, so he'll listen to this podcast. I'm going to tell him right now. Okay, let's get that out there.
I like it.
I think
left further into the development phase. I just say this because I encounter it so often. Privacy and security are an afterthought. We're sitting on a Zoom call. Privacy and security were an afterthought until, of course, they got whacked under CCPA. But anyway, be that as it may, now we're going to ask both of you to take out your crystal, your ball, and talk to us a little bit about what happens with privacy in the next 3 to 5 years. And Chris, given your background, I'd be interested to hear your 2 cents on the federal privacy law that's percolating around.
So I would have counted myself. Well, so you may not discount my prognostications here, because 6 months ago, if you had asked me this question, I would have said there's very little chance that privacy will ever become a reality, a federal law. And yet here we are on the cusp of potentially, it doesn't look like it'll be in this Congress, but an unprecedented amount of bipartisan agreement, which itself is almost a bit of an anachronism these days. But a broad set of agreements around not just what a federal privacy bill can be, but what I was actually really heartened to see is that there's real substance to this. I think there were a number of people out there who have feared that what a federal privacy bill would end up being is a bit of a toothless, diluted type of standard, preempting a lot of the great progress that state laws have done, and the whole process might get co-opted. And I think what we've seen is actually this federal bill represents probably the most aggressive push in terms of substantive privacy legislation, even beyond GDPR, in really meaningful ways. I think sometimes GDPR is obviously a reticulated privacy regulation that can often feel more about process than it does about true substance. And I think the federal bill, whether it's the way it reconceptualizes the civil rights of certain types of data, creates private rights of action, meaningfully thinks about true limits around the way types of data can be used and way specific data cannot be used, barring certain types of explicit consents. There's a real richness to this. And I think there's still, of course, with Senator Cantwell, remain a few kinks to be ironed out here. But I do think that this is it's a bit of a one-way ratchet, and it's going to be very difficult to imagine a federal bill not kind of delivering on what we've seen here today. Maybe there, of course, there might be compromises here and there as they go about, but I think it's been a huge marker. And so, look, if I had to predict, I would say within the next Congress, I mean, who knows what's going to emerge in the next Congress? I think there's actually a legitimately good shot at seeing some federal bill going. And I think, given what we've seen, again, these are all compromises. And I don't think, of course, no one is going to be perfectly happy with the full range of what this bill is. But I think, given where we've been, this is an incredible opportunity. And so I'm hoping that they will act on this.
So, when you're at a cocktail party and people ask you, what should I be doing from a privacy and security perspective? What is your best personal privacy tip that you would offer? Jad, why don't you go first?
Great question. Maybe I've become soft more recently because I found myself a number of times saying, you know what, it's not your fault. And I've really recently had a number of conversations where something bad happened. Someone's account on some social media or anywhere else got hijacked. And as a result of that, it started to spew bad information or to be used to target other friends and so on the social graph. And people reach out and they're in panic and like, what do I do? First thing is, it's not your fault. I think there is a sense of guilt. People understand privacy, people understand security, they try to do the right things, but it starts to feel sometimes overwhelming. And it's a reminder that, bad things do happen. There is some amount of hygiene that you should be thinking about and doing, but also at the same time, organizations can be doing more to help you protect your accounts in more natural and simple ways. For instance, when you look at all these password complexity requirements when you want to create an account on a website, they're becoming daunting. And as a result of that, it's just very, very difficult for users to do the right things and feel that they're naturally thinking about security and privacy, as opposed to organizations pushing their problems onto end users. So for me, again, with the same spirit that you can't have privacy without security, first thinking about your password reuse. A lot of folks just reuse the same password everywhere. And maybe it's difficult to think about password managers and other things, but at the same time, you have to protect some sensitive accounts differently than you do your average website. And so at least having separate password for those sensitive accounts, including your email, because if your email is compromised, then it leads to pretty much a lot of other compromises of your accounts. Keeping software, up to date, particularly your browser, your operating system, on all of your devices, your laptops, your phones. Those are very basic security hygiene steps that you want to take. In addition to that, what I find the most compelling about privacy is that it's very, very deeply personal. What you care about in terms of your privacy is very different than what I care about. And so as a result of that, I never weigh in on anything until sort of I understand better what you're worried about. And that's, I think, what makes us very passionate about this field and thinking about it more. So whether you're worried about being tracked in real life, whether you're worried about how your facial scans are being used at airports, check-ins, whether you're worried about sort of social media and what you post there, having anonymous accounts that could be outed, all of those are deep privacy subjects, and they're just fascinating.
I have to say that whoever was asking Jod about that, and he's telling them it's not your fault, they must have caught him a few drinks into that cocktail hour, because that's a much softer line than I've heard Jod ever take on security before.
Chris, what would be your best personal tip? Any that you would add to what was already shared?
I mean, over a cocktail hour, I think when it comes to privacy, right, there's an increasing number of settings in our smartphones that Apple and Google have allowed users to help control their data. And so I do think my biggest advice is to go ahead and make sure you plumb the depths of all of those options. Some are being triggered by default, and some you actually have to affirmatively use. But those are really empowering ways of seizing the autonomy I think we all want. I mean, ultimately, what privacy comes down to is autonomy, the ability to control what data you want to share and how it's going to be shared. And the more we can empower people to flex that autonomy and use the tools that they have at their disposal, the better it can do that. And so, yes, there's lots that policymakers can do that go beyond the bounds of the cocktail conversation. And so what consumers can do is to really make sure you are taking advantage of this broader suite of services.
When he mentions autonomy, we get into issues of self-sovereignty and this other technology that Jody will soon talk about, which is...
We're not doing it.
The blockchain. We always like to ask our guests the same final is, when you're not building this really cool privacy software company, what do the two of you like to do for fun that's not privacy or security related?
I'll start first. I'll just say that my fun thing for the past year has been really planning with my wife a destination wedding. And sort of this came about, we've all been locked down in this pandemic. And sort of when we knew we wanted to get married, we floated the idea of a destination wedding with a few friends, and they were so excited about just having a reason to travel and change scenery. And it has more overhead, but we worked on it, and we just got married 2 weeks ago in Italy. It's been very, very exciting, and just changing scenery and seeing something new and traveling and all of that has been just incredible, and look forward to the next steps. But that's been my fun outside of work.
Well, congratulations. That's very exciting.
Thank you.
Chris, what about you?
So at the outset, you kind of already outed me. I'm a bit of a word nerd. So yes, crossword puzzles, Wordle, things along those lines remain kind of my passions outside of the data life. Of course, I've now gone one step further and corrupted my own children, who are 7 and 9, and they have now become I've condemned them to probably a world of atomic wedgies from their peers when they get into later schools, because they're now word nerds themselves, want to do the Wordle with me. They're look forward to the Times kids section every month to do the kids crossword puzzles. So I think I'm gonna have to start a therapy fund really early for them.
It's all good. Well, thank you so much to both of you for sharing your vision for privacy and security, and helping us understand what TerraTrue is doing in this space to help make it easier for companies. We'll be sure to share all the links to how to connect with you in our show notes as well. So we're grateful for your time today. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.